Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all. Thank you for joining. We're ready to begin our Torah class on the Torah portion of Emor, which is this week's Torah portion. If you're in the Blue Art Scroll Chumash, it's on page 672. If you're in any other Chumash, it's chapter 21 of the book of Leviticus, Vayikra. So the opening section of this week's Torah portion talks about a subject which amazingly is still practiced as Jewish law until this very day. Now, why is that amazing? Because primarily the role of the Kohen in the temple has ceased because we no longer have a holy temple in Jerusalem. So the Kohanim, whose primary function and responsibility was to serve in the temple, no longer have their main occupation. Having said that, being a Kohen is still an honorary title until this very day, with some responsibility. So it's an honorary title because they're the descendants of Aaron, the high priest, and there even, believe it or not, been some DNA testing with certain markers that could identify Kohens, not definitively, but we do see a certain genetic link between all Kohanim who are descendants of Aaron, the high priest, which is again remarkable, 3,000 plus years later. But the Kohanim, if you were in the synagogue on the holidays, the Passover, you saw the Kohanim went up to do the priestly blessing. And that's a role that they still perform today, because one of the commandments of the Kohanim is to bless the Jewish people with love. And they perform that duty in the diaspora on all the major holidays. In Israel, at the Western Wall, it's done daily, every single morning during the daily services. So that is a role that they still perform. However, the opening of this week's Torah portion talks about not the roles and responsibilities of the Kohen, which is something that we have throughout the book of Leviticus, but it talks about the restrictions of a Kohen. Now, because the Kohanim are holy, they're designated to the service of God, they must refrain from doing certain things. And the opening law of the Torah portion is that a Kohen is not allowed to come into contact with a corpse, with a deceased person. So first we have to understand what that is all about. So in Judaism, a big portion of Jewish law revolves around the subject of purity and impurity, kedusha and tumah. Tahara, purity, and tumah, impurity. Now, this obviously is not a physical condition, it's completely spiritual. And the Kohanim always had to be in a state of purity. And if they became impure, they had to go through a ritual of counting 7 days and go immersing themselves in the water of the mikvah. But the main cause for impurity is coming into contact with a dead body, with a corpse. A dead body has spiritual defilement associated with it, which anyone, not only who touches it, but is even in the same room as the corpse, becomes ritually unclean. And therefore the Kohen, who always has to maintain a state of purity, cannot be in contact with a deceased person. The opening of the Torah portion says there are 7 exceptions. God forbid if the Kohen loses his mother, father, spouse, brother, sister, son, or daughter, he's allowed to come into contact with that dead person. There's one more exception in Jewish law, and that is what is known as a met mitzvah, a deceased person who is a mitzvah. What does that mean? A person who does not have any relatives, and as a result of that, no one is there to care, or any friends to care for their burial. So that's the ultimate mitzvah, to help arrange the burial of a person who cannot help themselves, obviously, and they don't have friends or family to help them arrange their burial. So then even the Kohen has to become unclean in order to bury that person. Now, why do I say it's practiced till today? Because till today, a Kohen cannot go to a cemetery. A matter of fact, our Rabbi Rice at the synagogue, as you know, Rabbi Yosef Rice, is a Kohen. And therefore, he cannot attend funerals. He cannot go to a chapel service. If he needs to go to a cemetery, he only could be on the road, on the perimeter. He cannot go into the cemetery because Kohanim still maintain that sanctity, just like when the Torah commandments of the Kohen were given. So what is it about a corpse that contracts or defiles those who come into contact with them? So in order to understand that, we just have to look at a verse in Deuteronomy. And one of the verses in Deuteronomy is where Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, and actually this verse is very powerful because next time you're in synagogue, if you pay attention, you'll see that when we take out the Torah, a lot of people miss this, but when we take out the Torah, we put it on the bima, and then whoever's calling out the aliyot, which in our synagogue is myself, I say a little preamble, like it's like a prelude to calling up the first person, which basically means may God give us strength and comfort and salvation to all those who seek Him. Let's give honor to the Torah and ascribe greatness to God's name. Ya'amod, we're calling up to the Torah, so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, Kohen. The first Aliyah is a Kohen. And then the whole congregation is supposed to chime in. I say it, but everyone's supposed to chime in with the following 6 words. It's actually 7 words. It's a verse from Deuteronomy. And you are attached or clinging or connected to God today because you are all alive. That's the verse that we choose in the liturgy to say at this point. We're now going to study Torah. We're going to attach ourselves to God through the Torah study, but by the fact that you're alive, you are attached to God. So what does that mean? What it means is as follows. Sometimes I'm talking to a Jew and I say to him, would you like to put on tefillin? Would you like to come study Torah? Would you like to pray? And one of the answers I get sometimes from people is they say, Rabbi, I'm not a spiritual person. Like, don't talk to me about spiritual things. I'm good for other things, but not spiritual things, you want me to give tzedakah to help poor people? That I get. But spirituality is not my thing. And when people say to me, I'm not a spiritual person, sometimes I think to myself, or sometimes even say to them, I say, if you are not a spiritual person, you wouldn't be alive. Why? Because what makes us alive? If you look at a living person versus a dead person, God forbid if you've ever been present when someone dies, right? The body is there. Nothing changes from a moment before death to a moment after death. Every part of the body is identical to the way it was when the person was alive a minute ago. So what changed? The only thing that changed is that the soul departed. The soul left the body. And now, when you look at that body, that deceased person, it's physical. There's nothing spiritual there anymore. Now, in Judaism, the body is sacred because it was the home, the temple for the soul throughout the course of the life. And therefore, we treat the body with tremendous respect and sanctity, hence a Jewish burial, not cremation, not other forms, because the body was the palace for the king where God resided for the lifespan of this person. But once the soul leaves, it's purely physical. But everyone that's alive, thank God, all of us, the reason we're alive is because a part of God is inside of us, which is our neshama, our godly soul. And therefore, not only are we spiritual, that's really what we really are. In other words, our body is nothing more than a garment. If I asked you, who are you? Yourself or your clothing? You say, my clothing is just a superficial layer that I wear over my body. That's not me. Maybe it's somewhat of a reflection of me because I chose the clothing or the style of the clothing, but it's not who I am. Well, if you go a step deeper, your body is just a pair of clothing for the soul. Your body is the vehicle with which your soul functions and operates in this world. You need eyes, you need ears, you need hands, you need legs, you need all of these body parts to fulfill your purpose in this world. But what's driving your body? What's the spiritual source and core of your whole being? It's your soul. So when you are alive, it's because part of God is inside of you. And therefore you're attached to God constantly through your soul. You have this internal GPS that's always connecting you to the satellite, which is God, because you have a soul within inside of you. When a person dies, the soul has left the body. And because the soul has left the body, there's a void, there's an emptiness, there is a absence of godliness. And that absence of godliness is marked and recognized by the process of impurity, that now the body is unholy because it's void of God's presence, and therefore Kohen cannot come into contact with that body. And therefore Kohen, except for 7 relatives, cannot come into contact with the deceased. Now, on a psychological level, you can say, that's of a technical, spiritual level, but from a psychological level, you can say perhaps, is that the Kohen is the one who is the teacher of Torah, the one who inspires the nation. And therefore, they have to remain in a constant, positive, optimistic, joyful state. Believe it or not, one of the most important criteria for prophecy in the Torah is joy. God would never rest on a prophet when they weren't in a state of joy. Some of the prophets would play music to arouse joy to receive the divine prophecy. So we all know that when we encounter death, it creates a certain somber sadness, pessimism sometimes about life and the futility of life. When we say, what's the purpose of all of it if this is the way it ends? And we become fodder for the worms. So the Kohen, who always has to remain in an exalted spiritual state, cannot come into contact with the deceased. That's just maybe perhaps a psychological approach to it. But the technical reason is because of purity. And what is purity? What is holiness? Attachment to God. What does it mean, attachment to God? Attachment to God means that we're in a constant state of receiving and giving, like a living person. That's the definition of life. The free flow of not just energy, but of our lives through all of our deeds and our actions. And we're constantly, if you look at breath, you inhale and you exhale. That represents what life is all about. The heart beats, right? To and fro. Life is about receiving and giving. And as opposed to a person who is dead, who doesn't have the ability to receive or to give. You know, Shimon Peres once said that in Israel, there are 2 seas. There's the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. Now, everyone knows the best fishing and the best fish and all of it, Sea of Galilee is teeming with life and vitality, with fish, with coral, with flora, with everything. The Dead Sea, if you've ever been to the Dead Sea, is, as its name implies, it's dead. There's no life. Nothing could live in the Dead Sea. And Shimon Peres once asked the question, he said, listen, both seas receive their water from the Jordan River. Why is that one is full of vitality and life and one is dead? And he gave a very interesting answer. He said that the Sea of Galilee receives its water and then releases it to the rest of the land. The Dead Sea is a closed body of water. It receives, but it does not release. And he said that's the definition of life versus death. The definition of life is that you're receiving and giving. The definition of death is that you're just receiving and not giving. That's why it says the righteous are alive even when they die, because they're giving even in the afterlife. When we study their teachings or guided by their words or inspiration or their good deeds are still having an impact, they're still giving. And a wicked person is dead during their lifetime as well, because even during their lifetime, they're not giving, they're not contributing anything. So the Kohen cannot come into contact with any of the with a corpse, except if it's the 7 immediate relatives. I want to just make a minor observation. When it talks about the 7 relatives, it says the following, and I'm just going to read it in Hebrew and translate it. It says, he should not defile himself by coming into contact with a corpse. And by the way, if you're familiar with the laws of a mikveh, where a woman after her menstrual cycle goes to the mikveh, there is the same idea. Why is a woman unclean when she has her cycle? It's not a physical uncleanliness, because if that was the case, she could take a shower. It's about spiritual purity. Why? Because the menstrual cycle represents the potential for life that was not realized and materialized through conception. So when a woman experiences the menstrual cycle, she has to go through the process of 7 days of cleanliness and then the mikveh, because we are, so to speak, recognizing the impurity that comes from even a life that wasn't realized, that a potential for life, the egg that wasn't fertilized. Now, that's a very high sensitivity level, but it surely makes us think about, I know on Shabbat, if you were in shul, I talked about Roe versus Wade, abortion, without getting into that now, and Judaism's perspective on life or the potential for life. And here we see that every month a woman goes to the mikveh because there was not even a fetus, but just an egg that could have turned into a fetus, that could have turned into a life. But that's just a side subject, something to think about. But something I want to point out is when it lists the 7 relatives, it says as follows. The 7 relatives is ki im l'shero hakarov elav. It says, except for the relative who is closest to him, to his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, and to his brother and his sister. Now, it only lists 6 relatives: mother, father, brother, sister, son, daughter. But I told you originally the wife is included as well. And here is the way you get to the wife. The verse says, except he could defile himself by coming into contact with the following relatives. Then it says to his flesh that is closest to him. Now, you could see that as an introduction to who is the flesh that he's closest to: father, mother, brother, sister, son, daughter, God forbid. But no, the rabbis say the flesh that is closest to him is his spouse. That's a category unto itself. But instead of saying to his wife, it says the flesh that is closest to him. And this is, again, another reiteration of the Torah's perspective on marriage. You know, when you go all the way back to Genesis, when God makes Adam and Eve, he makes Adam, and then he says it's not good for man to be alone. And God takes a bone from Adam and makes Eve. And when Adam wakes up from his surgery of being put to sleep by God to make a woman for him, God says, Adam says, she is the bone of my bone, the flesh of my flesh. Therefore, she should be called Isha, from the man. So the whole idea of God making Eve out of Adam versus a separate entity is saying that the woman and the husband are one entity. They come from the same source, just like Eve physically came from Adam. Our souls and our soulmates, soul, are 2 halves of one whole that in heaven was sent into 2 bodies only to be reconnected here. And therefore the Torah says a man should leave his mother and father and cling to his wife. Vidavak, the word davak is like the word devek. In Hebrew, the word devek means glue. You should cling and stick and attach yourself and become one to your spouse. So when the Torah wants to talk about the Kohen's wife, it says to the flesh that's closest to him, which is his very own spouse. And that's really not just a physical description, it's a spiritual description. How do you know what a real marriage is? A real marriage is where you feel like you're one with the other person. That it's not, the other person is a part of you. And, you know, sometimes you'll hear spouses talk and, you know, or about marriage and say, you know, sometimes you have to sacrifice for your husband, sometimes he sacrifices for you, or a husband will say to the wife, well, last week I did this, I didn't want to do that, but I did that for you, now you have to do this for me, we'll take turns, we'll make deals, we'll sacrifice for each other. But that's not the real definition of marriage. The real definition to marriage is that whatever makes your wife happy or whatever makes your husband happy is not a sacrifice for you. That makes you happy too. So if your wife loves going to her parents, even if you don't like going to your in-laws, you get pleasure and joy going to your in-laws because you're watching your wife get pleasure and joy being with her parents. Or if your husband loves to watch football and you couldn't care less for football, but you see he's having such a good time watching football, then you'll get joy because he's getting joy. If it makes him happy, it makes me happy. So if your wife wants to go shopping and you can't stand going shopping, but if this one makes my wife happy, it's not that I'm giving up my Sunday to go shopping and do something I don't want to enjoy. If you're really one with your spouse, you get joy watching her get joy. And therefore, it's not about, I did this for you, you have to do this for me. We each get joy because if you're one with somebody, their joy is your joy. I would say it's very much the same with children, right? If you're a good parent, even if you have no interest in what your kid is doing, you have a kid who loves art and you don't know the foggiest thing about art. Art doesn't interest you at all, but you'll get joy watching your child, paint or play the piano, or, every mother gets joy watching her kids eat, feeding their kids, right? Because I'm watching the one I love get joy and happiness, and that makes me happy. We all know when children, their joy, you could feel joyous when you see their joy. And that's the way it should be with a husband and wife. And that's why when the Torah describes the wife, it doesn't say your wife, the Kohen's wife. It says the one that's closest to him. Because in a sense, the husband and wife are the closest relationship, even more than a parent and a child. We just came from Mother's Day. And something about parents, which is very interesting, the way God created it, is that the love between a parent and a child is you love that as the child gets older, the parent has to let go. You see, when you think about love between a husband and wife, the longer you're married, the deeper and the closer you get, the more attached and one you become with your spouse. Time brings you closer and closer. With children, it's a little bit the opposite. As your kids get older, you give them more and more freedom and they gain more and more independence, to the point that, of course, you always love your children and your children always love you, but you're not the main focus of your child's life as they get older and they go on with their lives. And if they get married, God willing, their spouse becomes the focus of the life. And then they have children, their children become the main focus. And of course, honor your father and mother is the most important commandment, one of the most important commandments. But it's not a relationship that naturally always goes closer and closer. At a certain point, children have their own lives. So the love of the parent is when the parent is willing to let the child go in their own direction in life. And we all know sometimes kids want to move to the other end of the earth. I have a job in Abu Dhabi. I'll see you. And maybe you only see your kids once a year when they come in for Hanukkah or for Pesach, Not like a husband and wife that are, someone once said that the best part about marriage is that you're never alone. And the worst part about marriage is that you're never alone. Now, the idea, of course, is that, with a spouse, you're together 24/7, pretty much all the time for your entire life. So you're always closer and closer. But children go off to do their own thing sometimes, and that's part of loving them, letting them find their own direction and path in life. So when the Torah describes the one you're most close with, it's your spouse. There's an old elderly woman in our shul, and her name is Pearl Ginsburg. God bless her. She's 96. She's up in New York now. But she once said to me, it's obvious, but she said it like, I forgot exactly how she said it, so I don't want to quote her, but something to the effect that who comes first, your spouse or your children? And her answer, she was an old-fashioned woman, but she said, of course your spouse comes before the children. But furthermore, she said that that's the best thing you could do for your child, to show them that your spouse comes first. And it's not just because of what I'm saying now, but it's also because the greatest thing parents can give their children, or one of the greatest things, is an example of that selfless love. So going back to our Torah portion, it begins with the Kohanim and the laws of who they can come into contact and who they cannot come into contact with. But now I want to fast forward to what I would say is what this Torah portion is known for. And for this, we would have to go a little bit further to chapter 23 of this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion contains what is referred to as Parshat Hamoadim, the Torah section. By the way, does anyone have any questions or comments on what we talked about the Kohanim before we go any further? Because we're going to change topics right now. So if you have a question, feel free to type it in and I'll try to address the laws of the Kohanim. But this week's Torah portion contains all of the Jewish holidays. So the Jewish calendar, on my desk, I'm sure you have one on your desk or hanging in your house. It's not enough to have a regular calendar. If you're a Jew, you need a Jewish calendar. Why? Oh, let me look up when Passover is this year. When's Rosh Hashanah this year? Or when does Yom Kippur fall out? Because the Gregorian calendar, the lunar calendar are different calendars. As we know, there's a Hebrew calendar and an English calendar. One is following the solar Gregorian calendar, and one is following the lunar calendar. And they're 11 days up short each year. The lunar calendar is shorter. So, the holidays move around. That's why people say, Rosh Hashanah is early this year, it's late this year, and so on and so forth. So a Jew, in order to plan your life, you need to know when is Shavuos, when is Rosh Hashanah, when is Yom Kippur, when is Sukkot, when is Hanukkah, when is Purim. We got to plan around all these holidays. So we have a Jewish calendar. What is inside the Jewish calendar? This week's Torah portion, which is absolutely mind-boggling, in my mind at least. God set up a schedule for Jews in the Torah 3,300 years ago that we're still following today. So in 4 weeks from now, we're going to celebrate Shavuot, the day we got the Torah. Who told us when Shavuos is? This week's Torah portion says after Passover, you count 49 days. The 50th day is Shavuos. Hence, every year for the past 3,300 years, every Jewish calendar said on the 6th day of Sivan, which is next month, Holiday of Shavuos, commemorating the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. It's like God took all of our social diaries, all of our social calendars, and penciled in dates for now and eternity. And the first holiday, believe it or not, is Shabbat. That's the first one that God created. So God says, okay, every seventh day, Shabbat. Go to synagogue, pray, have a Shabbat meal, light the candles. And there it is. If you're a Jew, it's in your calendar for the next 120 years. Every Shabbat is there already in advance, scheduled, special time for you, for your family, for Hashem, for Torah study, for all the good things that you need to do on Shabbat, right? And God did that with every holiday. He told us when Rosh Hashanah is going to be, the 10th day of the 7th month, and when Yom Kippur is going to be. So, you ever hear people say, I better write this in my calendar. If it's not in my calendar, it's not going to happen. You know what I mean? Or you tell someone, oh, I'm looking forward to our appointment tomorrow. He said, oh, I forgot to put it in my calendar. I overlooked it. I already have it, right? You got to put it in the calendar, right? So God says the same thing. He says, you got to schedule things. You got to make time for what's important in life. You see, in life, there's what's urgent and what's important. And we're always told, don't let what's urgent push aside what's important. So, a lot of couples that have a date night or, parent-children time or whatever it is, and you schedule it way in advance. So, this is what we're doing on this and this day. Because if you don't schedule it, what's going to happen? Something came up. I'm too busy. We got like this, these dates, we're going on a family vacation. We're going on a date night. I'm taking my kid to a ball game, whatever it is. Well, if that's important for material things, how much more for spiritual? God says we need time allocated, designated, reserved time on the calendar when we're going to spend some time together. We're going to talk about things. We're going to focus on what's important. Shabbat, a day of peace, a day of serenity, a day of prayer, of Torah study, of community, of relationship with God, a day of rest. And every holiday has a theme, like we just came from Passover. And God says, okay, every year on the anniversary of the Exodus from Egypt, just like you have on your calendar to celebrate your birthday, your anniversaries, your other milestones. God says, okay, every Passover, I want you to celebrate a 7-day holiday. And you know what you're going to focus on? Your story, your history as a Jewish nation, your Jewish identity, how you became a nation, how God took you out of Egypt. And you're going to sit around the table with your family on the night of the Seder, and you're going to discuss how the Jewish nation was born, what our mission statement was, why God took us out of Egypt, and all the implications and lessons. And every year we do that. You know why we do it? Because it's on the calendar. We're told when to do it every year. If God just said, hey, by the way, you should, one day a year, you should sit down and talk about, the story of the Exodus from Egypt and how you became a nation. How many of us would do it? And what's also wonderful about it is that everyone's doing it at the same time. So all of the Jewish people are having the same conversation, the same discussion, reading the same Haggadah on the same night. So we're all connected, focused. And the same thing applies to everything. Yom Kippur, God says, you need one day a year to focus on forgiveness, letting go of resentment, letting go of anger, forgiving other people. So it's in the calendar. One day a year, all you're going to think about is asking for forgiveness and granting forgiveness. And it gives us that space to do that. It gives us the inspiration and the motivation to forgive and to ask for forgiveness if we've wronged somebody else. But furthermore, everyone's open to it because that's what the holiday is all about. So if you call your friend right before Yom Kippur and say, listen, I know we had a bad relationship, we had a falling out, I hurt you, you hurt me, let's make peace now. It's before Yom Kippur, let's forgive each other. Well, they're on the way to synagogue for Yom Kippur too. They want to go to synagogue with a clean slate, so they're more inclined to forgive. So there's a day for forgiveness. And when we come to Shavuot, which is 4 weeks from now, we're going to come to the synagogue. And what are we going to talk about? How God gave us the Torah, which is our moral guide and our ethical compass for life. And think about what are the values, the ideals, the principles that I'm living my life by. What are the Torah ideals? And every holiday, Sukkot, we build a little hut and we remember, life is a journey. It's all temporary, like the sukkah, here today, gone tomorrow. We got to make the most of this journey. So every holiday inspires us with a different message. And because it's on the calendar, what's the difference between a to-do list and a calendar? Everyone has to-do lists, but the to-do list doesn't say, to-do list tells you what you need to do. It doesn't tell you when you need to do it. When you put it in your calendar, now there's not just a what, there's a when. I got to get this done today or this week. And that's what God is doing. He's saying all of the lofty ideals. Shabbat is about peace, and Rosh Hashanah is about new beginnings, and every holiday has a message. But you need to have a day on the calendar that you're going to actually spend time thinking about it, learning about it. When you go to synagogue, everyone's going to be talking about it, and the rabbi is going to give a sermon about it, and you're going to be inspired on this message for this. So that's the remarkable genius of the schedule of the Jewish calendar. And I have to just add and say that, especially in today's day and age, where American holidays have pretty much lost their meaning. So we're coming up to July 4th in a couple of months. Independence Day. How many people take time on July 4th to, read the Constitution, to talk about the story of our ancestors who came to America and the founding fathers and whatever? July 4th, let's have a barbecue. Let's go shopping. There's some July 4th sales. There's no depth to it. There's no spiritual meaning to it. Memorial Day. Yeah, we remember the soldiers. How many people go to memorial ceremonies? In Israel, we had Yom HaZikaron this week. All the cemeteries are filled with people, memorials all day, all night. People are really remembering, So, we have New Year's. Yeah, Happy New Year. We go to parties, we get drunk, and then at midnight, the ball drops and everyone has a good time. Very nice. Nothing wrong with that. But think about Rosh Hashanah, Jewish New Year. It's not just let's go have fireworks and a party. It's let's go to shul. Let's hear the shofar, the call of the shofar to awaken us, to arouse us. It's a new beginning. It's a new year. We can start all over, fresh start, and all the prayers and all the songs we sing in the synagogue and the cantor and the Dvar Torahs and everything is geared towards, okay, let's spend 2 days on Rosh Hashanah really thinking about, not 1 day, 2 days, to think about the new year and what it's going to mean for us, not just, it's a new year. I want to lose some weight this year. I want to get a membership at the gym or whatever. No, let's talk about the direction of our lives. What are we accomplishing? What are we achieving? Think about what we've done during the past year, what we want to accomplish, really, soul searching. So all of the Jewish holidays are found in this week's Torah portion. Now, as I mentioned, the very first holiday, even though we don't think of it as a holiday, but it's listed as the number one holiday. And by the way, we say holiday, which in Hebrew means a chag, but the word used in this week's Torah portion is moed. The moadim is the designated times, the appointed times. So these are the appointed times on the calendar. So what is the first appointed time? Shabbat. God says, listen, I made the world in 6 days. I rested on the seventh day. Every human being needs to rest on Shabbat. And we begin Shabbat with Kiddush, declaration Friday night over a cup of wine, where we basically recount the story. God made the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. And first and foremost, we're remembering creation, that God made the world. There are many people who don't believe in the creation of the world. They don't believe in God, maybe, or they believe that the world is just a random accident, a big bang that happened by itself without any creator, without any author of life. So we declare every Shabbat, no, we believe that God made the world and the world has a purpose to it. And we were created inside this world because God has a purpose for our lives. And that's every single week. So the first reason why we keep Shabbat is to remember creation. Now, what's the second pillar of Judaism? The first one is creation. What's the second pillar? Redemption. God took us out of Egypt. In other words, it's one thing to believe God created the world, but does God take an active role in the affairs of the world, in the lives of mankind, in my personal life? Is there a personal God I can pray to redeem me from my circumstances, just like he redeemed our ancestors from Egypt? So the Exodus from Egypt tells us, yeah, God made the world, but he not only created the world, just like when you created your child, you didn't abandon your child, you care for your child constantly. Well, God cares about us because we're his children, and he will redeem us. He has redeemed us in the past, and he will redeem us in the future. That's the belief in the coming of Mashiach. So after creation, you have redemption. And indeed, when you look at the 10 commandments in the book of Exodus, it says, you know why you should keep Shabbat? The fourth commandment of the 10 commandments, because God made the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh day. But when you look in Deuteronomy, Devarim, when Moshe repeats the 10 commandments, he gives a different reason. He says, keep the day of Shabbat because you remember you were slaves in Egypt and God took you out. So you see two different reasons for keeping Shabbat. One is to remember creation. The other one is to remember that God redeemed you. You don't have to be a slave. God doesn't want you to be a slave to Pharaoh 7 days a week. He wants you to only be subservient to him and to live a free life. And therefore, Shabbat reminds us that we're not slaves. We're human beings, and every human being should have a day of rest. So that's the second pillar of Judaism. You have creation, and then you have redemption. But coming from Passover, which is redemption, we're going to the next holiday, which is a continuation of Passover, and that's Shavuot. We're counting 49 days to Shavuot. What's the 49th day count to Shavuot? Shavuot is revelation at Mount Sinai, which means God spoke to the Jewish people and gave us a Torah for us and through us to share with the world. In other words, God could be the creator, God could be the redeemer, but does God communicate with us? Does God reveal himself to us? Does God make himself known to us? So obviously God gave us the Torah, so that's God's revelation. And that's the third pillar of Judaism: creation, redemption, revelation. But revelation is not just in the past at Mount Sinai. Through the Torah, God reveals himself to us every day right now we're studying Torah. We're revealing God's will to us in our lives. But God also speaks to us through the meditation of our heart, through the, epiphanies we get, or through circumstances in life that we encounter that reveal God's message to us, or God's divine providence. So these are the three tenets of Judaism. God created us and the world. God redeemed us and will redeem us and does redeem us from our circumstances that are difficult or troubling, like he did to our ancestors, because he cares and loves us, cares about us and loves us. And God reveals himself to us. He speaks to mankind in the present. So creations in the past, the ultimate redemption we're yearning for is Mashiach in the future, redeem mankind. The wolf will lie with the lamb. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. You'll beat your swords into plowshares. There'll be no more war, no more jealousy, no more hatred. But revelation is right now. I can communicate with God every day. Prayer, Torah study. God makes himself known to man, to every one of us. If we open ourselves up, God will speak to us. God will communicate with us. Not in an audible voice, but through our souls, through our hearts, through our minds. And that's revelation. And that's what this week's Torah portion is. Shabbat as well. Shabbat as a designated time to meet. Just like if I say, hey, let's get together and meet. I want to get together with you. What am I saying? I'm saying I want to talk to you. I want to know you better. I want to learn about you. I want to share myself with you. That's why you have a meeting with somebody, to learn about that person or to share or communicate knowledge and information to each other. In this week's Parsha, God says Shabbat is a moed. It's a meeting time. It's like God says, and these are not my words. I think this is a quote from, I'm forgetting who, but some great author, maybe it was Abraham Joshua Heschel. Someone said, Shabbat is like God inviting you to his table every week, saying, come sit at my Shabbat table. I want to sit with you. You're my children. You're my people. I want to spend time with you and get to know you better and make myself known to you. And that's what we have to see Shabbat as. Shabbat is it's like you open your calendar and you say, okay, this day is reserved for God, reserved for spiritual pursuits and thoughts and feelings and relationships and so on and so forth. So these are the three different dimensions of Shabbat, which is the prelude to all the other holidays. Before I proceed, any other questions? If you want to type in a question, I'm very open to it. So after the holiday of Shabbat, it then goes on to the holiday of Passover, and then it goes on to a very unique mitzvah that we're performing right now. Today is the 24th day of the Omer. We're in the middle of the 49-day count to get to Mount Sinai, which is the holiday of Shavuot, receiving the Torah. By the way, it's the only holiday, Shavuot, that is not a designated day on the calendar. It just says count 49 days and get to the 50th day, which means it requires our preparation. And every day we count and we work on a different aspect of our characteristic traits and so on and so forth. Today's the 24th day in the 49-day count towards the Omer, towards the holiday of Shavuot. Now, this commandment to count the Omer is in this week's Torah portion. So we're actually doing the mitzvah of counting the Omer, and we say a blessing every night based on the commandment of this week's Torah portion. And there's so much to be said about this. Let me just try to make a few points. The first point is that we all know that Passover is the holiday we received our freedom. God freed us, liberated us from Egypt. However, God says that freedom is not complete until you get the Torah at Mount Sinai. And therefore, you have to count 49 days from Passover to the holiday of Shavuot. Why is freedom not enough? Because, and this is something, again, we could all understand from our personal lives, whether our own lives, our children's lives. What does it mean to be a free person? It doesn't just mean that you're not in jail, God forbid, or you're not in captivity, or in the confines of any other physical restraint that would rob you of your freedom. Obviously, that's the first step in freedom. But there are many, 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 many other layers to freedom. So there's physical freedom. Then there's psychological freedom. A person could be physically free in the freest country in the world, but they could be trapped in an internal prison. That internal prison could be guilt, it could be anger, it could be past traumas. So many things that confine a person, because what does it mean not to be free? It means I'm not free to express myself, to be myself. And there can be many other things that restrict a person's freedom. But the greatest encroachment on our freedom is our own evil inclination, Yetzer Hara. Because our Yetzer Hara can, God forbid, tempt us or lure us to do things that are harmful to our own being. And whether it's something immoral or unethical or whatever it may be, think about addictions, right? That's a very easy example. People who are addicted to substances, God forbid, they are a slave to that substance, to that passion, to that, and addictions doesn't only have to be towards drugs or alcohol. There's sex addictions and food addictions, a million types of addictions. But even if you don't take it to such an extreme as addictions, anytime you want to do the right thing and you feel compelled to do the wrong thing because of some inner compulsion, desire, instinct, and you can't overcome it and do what you really want to do because you're overtaken by this, desire, and you don't have the discipline to say no, you then given up your true freedom to choose what you want to do. And so the Torah is our guide to teach us how to live a truly free life, because freedom without discipline becomes chaos. What's the difference between a society that is functioning properly versus a society that is corrupt? Whether people are taking their personal freedoms and utilizing it in a way that is harmful to others. In a society where everyone respects each other and treats each other properly and says, yes, I may have freedom, but that doesn't mean I could take advantage of someone else or hurt somebody else. So every freedom has to come with some form of limitations. And Judaism is all about teaching us. One of the interesting things is that in our society, we have the Bill of Rights. In other words, as Americans, we're very focused on what are my rights. Even a criminal, when they're arrested, read me my rights, right? You never lose your rights. You go into the hospital, patient's Bill of Rights. You go into a workplace, the worker's Bill of Rights. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Judaism, if you read the Torah, it doesn't say you're entitled to anything. It doesn't say you have the right to . No, you know what the Torah is full of? Your obligations towards others. You are obligated not to lie to someone. You're obligated not to speak badly about someone. You're obligated to not steal from someone. You're commanded not to, be deceitful, not to hate somebody, right? It's what are my duties, not my rights. What are my responsibilities? Because freedom without responsibility is not freedom. Real freedom only comes when there are responsibilities, when there are guidelines and parameters to that freedom. Now, when you think about it, it's all this, it works out the same. In other words, let's say you have a marriage, right? For example. So I, as a husband, have responsibilities to my wife. My wife has responsibilities towards me. I could either focus on what are my rights as a married man, and my wife could be thinking, what are her rights as a woman? And could be thinking, well, you didn't give me what I deserve. I didn't get what I'm entitled to. Or I could be thinking not about what my rights are, what are my responsibilities to my wife? But think about how that would change the marriage if everyone's just focused on what's coming to them versus what they owe somebody else. It sort of goes back to what JFK said. Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. You could focus on what others owe you or what you owe others. Take parents and children. There are a lot of kids walking around really upset at their parents. They have all different types of, grievances. Now, there are legitimate grievances, God forbid, if a parent will abuse the child, whatever. But sometimes it's like, my father and mother didn't do this, didn't do that, right? The Torah doesn't say you as a child have certain rights that your parents have to provide. The Torah tells the parent what they have to do for the child. You as a parent must educate your child. You must provide food for your child. You have obligations. But the Torah tells the child, you have to honor your father and mother, and then tells the parent what they have to do for the child. Everyone should be thinking about, as JFK said, not what their country could do for them, but what they can do for their country. Meaning, we have to ask ourselves, what can I do for God, not what God can do for me? What can I do for my parents, not what my parents can do? What I can do for my spouse, for my children, for my coworkers, for my boss, for everyone. It's a much healthier society when everyone's focused on what their duties and their responsibilities are. That's why there is no real freedom without responsibility. There's just anarchy. Everyone just does what they want and what's in their own interest. And they don't care if they're hurting other people or offending other people or damaging other people. So therefore the Torah says, yeah, you want freedom. You can't have freedom without a Torah, without a moral code to life that governs the laws of how to not just receive freedom from Pharaoh, but to maintain it and sustain it in every generation. And to live a free life means that you're not controlled by anything. Anything could become your master. I'm going to tell you something interesting. My brother was visiting me on Sunday. I have a brother who lives in Miami. So he told me about something he bought on Amazon for $40. And I immediately went out and bought it. I didn't get it yet in the mail, but I'm looking forward to it. What is it? So I don't know if you have this problem, but if you have a cell phone, sometimes you could get addicted to your cell phone. You got to check the latest message, the latest text, the latest call, the latest this, the latest that. And it hinders your productivity because you're trying to focus, you want to study something, you want to do something that needs concentration for an hour, let's say, right? But your phone is buzzing and ringing, and then you got to check this, and I forgot, I have to send them an email. Let me run and send an email because I may forget later. And you're like, you think you're multitasking, but you're not really focusing on anything. So someone came up with a simple solution. Maybe you heard about it. It's called Lock Phone. I'm giving them a free advertisement. Lock Phone. It's basically a little case that you put your phone in and you lock it, and you set a timer. And the timer basically says you choose the length of time, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and you hit, it's like a safe box that you cannot open that thing for the next period of time. And now, even if you're tempted to send a text or check your social media account or to see the latest news in Google News or whatever, your box is locked. You can't get to that phone unless you take a hammer and break it open. You ain't getting your phone. But here's the little trick that the brain does. If I know my phone is locked up, my brother was telling me how great it is, because the minute you know I can't touch my phone for 2 hours, I set the timer for 2 hours, guess what? You stop thinking about the phone. You don't even get the urge to look at it because you know you can't. It's like you don't have an urge for something you can't do. I don't have, like, if you have, I don't know, you have cake in your house. You know you shouldn't eat the cake, but you really want to eat the cake. And every 10 minutes, should I have the cake? Should I have it? Maybe a little piece, a big piece, maybe 10. But if there's no cake in the house, you're not going to think about eating cake. I don't have cake in the house. The same thing is with the phone. So what is my point? My point is that your phone could be, I have the freedom, but do I have the freedom to put down my phone and not look at it for 2 hours? Well, speaking for myself, I bought the box because I don't have that freedom. I keep on checking it. And I know I'm wasting time and I shouldn't be doing that. And yeah, this is important and that's important. A lot of people today have a problem with texting and driving, right? I'm sure you go on the highway, you see people watching their phone, right? As they're driving, even though they know they're endangering their lives because they're addicted. They got to check their phone. They got to, how many stories have you read about people got into car crashes because they were texting, reaching for the phone? Well, you're getting in your car, you know you're going to be driving for 30 minutes. All you have to do is make one good decision. I'm putting my phone in my box. I'm setting the timer for 30 minutes till I get to my destination. I can't even open the phone if I wanted to. So it's a way of gaining control where otherwise you wouldn't have control. But it's just another little example of how freedom doesn't just mean I'm free. Freedom means the freedom to make the right choices in life and not be swayed by other influences, but follow what my mind knows is, our mind usually knows what's right. Someone once said to me, if you want to know if what you're doing is right or wrong, ask yourself, how would you feel if what you did was on the cover of the New York Times tomorrow? Would you be proud? If not, you most probably shouldn't be doing it, right? Like, our mind knows if it's right or wrong, but sometimes we rationalize, we justify, because we don't really have the freedom always to do what's right. Why? Because we don't have the moral or ethical or spiritual convictions or discipline to do what we know we should be doing or not be doing. So the Torah says, going out of Egypt is step one, but now you got to count 49 days and work on yourself to get to Shavuos. Shavuos is when we get the Torah. The Torah is the book that gives us our true freedom. And we'll just conclude by saying that throughout Jewish history, Jews never, experienced a lot of physical freedom. We were always being expelled from one country to the next country, always being persecuted, oppressed, pogroms, inquisitions, Holocaust, right? Concentration camps. Like, thank God we have Israel today. Things are much better. But the point is, physical freedom the Jewish people never had. On the other hand, there were many mighty countries and empires, the Egyptian and the Romans and the Greeks and the Babylonians and the Persians, mighty countries that had a lot of power and a lot of freedom. But ironically, we're here and they're not here today. And the answer is, with all of their power and freedom, they had moral decay. And if you don't have moral underpinnings and foundations and principles, no matter how powerful and successful you are, ultimately, it will crumble. And the Jewish people who had very little rights, very little freedom in a way of physical rights and freedom, but always had the spiritual, moral, godly foundation of the Torah, managed to preserve themselves and carry on till this very day, proving that more important than the physical freedom is the internal spiritual freedom that we each have to find within ourselves through the Torah's guidance to discover real inner freedom. And if you read Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, he talks about the concentration camps, how he saw people in the camps never losing their internal freedom, sharing their little piece of bread with somebody else. And the evil Nazis, who were so powerful and supposedly free, were, slaves to the most demonic, evil tendencies and urges of man. So the Torah is the completion of the freedom that we got on the holiday of Pesach. And that's why in this week's Parsha it talks about Pesach, the 49 days, and then the holiday of Shavuos. Great seeing everyone. Thank you all for joining, and look forward to seeing you on Shabbat, God willing. Have a wonderful day.